sometimes the most devastating conversations happen in the most ordinary moments. I was 26, sitting at my childhood kitchen table, when my dad asked me a simple question that would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. He looked at me with those tired eyes and said, "Did the money help?" I stared back at him, confused. What money? And that's when I looked at my mom. The color drained from her face so fast, I thought she might faint right there in her floral apron. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning started like any other Saturday in our small house in Millfield, Ohio. I'd driven down from Columbus to visit my parents, something I'd been doing more frequently since Dad's construction business had been struggling. The economic downturn had hit small contractors hard, and watching my father's calloused hands shake slightly as he poured his coffee had become a painful routine. Mom was at the stove making her famous blueberry pancakes, the same recipe she'd used since I was 7 years old. The kitchen smelled like butter and vanilla, and for a moment, everything felt normal. Dad sat across from me at the wooden table he'd built himself 15 years ago, reading glasses perched on his nose as he squinted at the local newspaper. "How's the apartment, sweetheart?" Mom asked, not turning around from the stove. Her graying hair was pulled back in the same loose bun she'd worn for decades. "It's good, Mom. Still expensive, but I'm managing." I wasn't lying exactly. My job as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup paid decent money, but Columbus rent wasn't cheap for someone just a few years out of college. Dad folded his newspaper and looked at me over his reading glasses. "We worry about you up there all alone. City life isn't easy." "I'm fine, Dad, really." I reached across the table and squeezed his weathered hand. "How's the business?" His expression darkened slightly. "Same as always. Not enough work, too many bills." He paused, then added, "But we're getting by." Mom set a plate of steaming pancakes in front of me, and I noticed her hands were trembling slightly. I'd attributed it to her age. She was 62 now, but looking back, I realized it was something else entirely. "These look amazing, Mom." I cut into the stack, watching the butter melt between the layers. "You know, I could help out a little if things are tight. I mean, I'm not rich, but—" "Absolutely not," Dad interrupted, his voice firm. "We raised you to take care of yourself, not to worry about us." "But Dad—" "No buts, Rebecca. We're your parents. We take care of you, not the other way around." I'd always admired my father's pride, even when it was frustrating. Robert Henderson had worked construction for 38 years, building houses and commercial buildings across 3 counties. His hands told the story of every project: scars from sharp metal, calluses from gripping tools, a crooked pinky finger from an accident when I was 12. Mom, Patricia, had worked part-time at the local library for as long as I could remember. She'd never wanted a full-time career, preferring to be home when I got off the school bus. They'd lived modestly but comfortably in the same 3-bedroom ranch house since before I was born. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being the clink of forks against plates and the old refrigerator humming in the corner. I was mentally calculating how much I could slip them without them noticing when Dad cleared his throat. "There's something I need to ask you about, Rebecca." Something in his tone made me look up sharply. Mom had gone very still at the stove, her back rigid. "What is it?" Dad's weathered face was serious, almost troubled. "The money that showed up in our account last month, did it help you out?" I blinked, completely confused. "What money?" "The $1,500. It appeared in our checking account on the 20th. We figured you'd transferred it to help with the mortgage payment." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. "Dad, I didn't send you any money. I would have told you if I had." The kitchen fell silent, except for the soft bubbling of something on the stove. I looked from Dad to Mom, who still hadn't turned around. "Mom?" I called softly. When she finally turned to face us, all the color had drained from her face. Her usually rosy cheeks were pale as paper, and her eyes had that deer-in-headlights look I'd seen only once before, when she'd accidentally broken her grandmother's antique vase when I was 10. "Patricia?" Dad's voice carried a note of concern I'd rarely heard. Mom's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. She gripped the edge of the counter behind her, knuckles white against the worn laminate. Mom, what's wrong? I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the linoleum floor. I need to sit down. Her voice was barely a whisper. Dad was on his feet instantly, guiding her to her chair with gentle hands. 43 years of marriage had taught him to read her moods, and right now, every alarm bell was ringing. Honey, what's going on? He asked, settling her into the chair I'd just vacated. Mom stared at her hands folded in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet we had to lean in to hear her. Money. It wasn't from Rebecca. Dad and I exchanged glances. Then where did it come from? He asked. Mom's shoulders began to shake, and I realized she was crying. Not the gentle tears I'd seen her shed at movies or when I'd graduated college, but deep, silent sobs that seemed to come from somewhere dark inside her. Mom, you're scaring me. I knelt beside her chair, placing my hand on her arm. Whatever it is, we can figure it out. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Guilt. Deep, crushing guilt that seemed to have aged her 10 years in the span of 5 minutes. There's something I never told either of you, she whispered. Something I should have said a long time ago. Dad sank back into his chair, his face grave. Patricia, what are you talking about? Mom wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara slightly. The money. It came from someone I knew a long time ago, before I married your father. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. I stayed kneeling beside Mom's chair, afraid that if I moved, she might stop talking altogether. Who? Dad's voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the tension underneath. His name was Michael Chen. We dated for 2 years before I met you, Robert. She looked at Dad with pleading eyes. He was getting his PhD in engineering at Ohio State when I was working at the campus bookstore. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Mom, why would he be sending you money now? Because, her voice broke completely, because I called him 3 weeks ago. The silence that followed was deafening. Dad's face had gone from confusion to something harder, something I'd never seen before. You called him, Dad repeated slowly. After 43 years of marriage, you called another man. It wasn't like that, Mom's voice rose desperately. Robert, please, it wasn't what you think. Then what was it? The question came out rougher than Dad probably intended. Mom looked between us, her eyes red and swollen. The mortgage. We were 3 months behind, and you were so stressed, so ashamed. You wouldn't let Rebecca help, wouldn't take money from anyone. I watched you lose 20 pounds from worry, saw you lying awake every night staring at the ceiling. Dad's jaw clenched. So you went to him. I found him on social media. He's successful now, owns his own engineering firm in California. He's wealthy, Robert. And when I explained our situation, he didn't hesitate. He said he owed me. Owed you? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Mom's eyes filled with fresh tears. When we broke up, it wasn't mutual. He wanted to marry me, had even bought a ring. But I was young and scared of leaving Ohio, scared of moving to California with him for his career. So I ended things, even though she stopped herself. Even though you what? Dad's voice was dangerously quiet. Even though I loved him too. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. I felt like I was witnessing something too private, too painful for me to see. But I couldn't move, couldn't look away from my parents' faces. Dad stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window overlooking the backyard where he'd taught me to throw a softball, where we'd had countless family barbecues, where everything had always felt safe and permanent. 43 years, he said to the window. 43 years, and you never told me you loved someone else first. Robert, please. Did you think about him during our marriage? When things got tough or boring or routine, did you wonder what life would have been like if you'd said yes to his proposal? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Mom's silence was enough. I finally found my voice. Mom, how did he even have your number? I messaged him through LinkedIn first, told him I was married, had a daughter, that we were going through a rough patch financially. He gave me his personal number and said to call any time. She wiped her nose with a tissue from her apron pocket. When I called, it was like no time had passed at all. He remembered everything. My favorite books, the way I liked my coffee, that little scar on my hand from when I cut myself making dinner for him. Dad turned from the window, his face a mask I didn't recognize. How long did you talk? 2 hours. The admission came out as barely a whisper. 2 hours. Dad's laugh was bitter. What else did you talk about, Patricia? Did you tell him how disappointed you were in your life? How did you regret choosing the small-town construction worker over the successful engineer? That's not fair. Mom stood up, her own anger finally surfacing. I never said anything like that. I told him about you, about Rebecca, about how proud I am of the life we built together. But you took his money. I took his money because I was desperate. Because I couldn't watch you suffer anymore, couldn't see you blame yourself for something that wasn't your fault. The economy tanked, Robert. That's not on you. I felt like I was watching my parents' marriage crack open right in front of me. Everything I'd believed about their relationship, about our family, was shifting under my feet. Dad walked out of the kitchen without another word. The screen door slammed behind him with a finality that made both Mom and me flinch. Through the window, I watched him stride across the backyard toward his workshop, his shoulders rigid with anger and hurt. Mom collapsed back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. Her whole body shook with quiet sobs. Mom! I pulled a chair close to hers. We need to talk about this. There's nothing more to say. Her voice was muffled by her palms. I've ruined everything. You haven't ruined everything, but you need to help me understand. This Michael guy. You said he remembered everything about you. That's not normal for someone you dated 43 years ago. She lifted her head, mascara streaked down her cheeks. We stayed in touch for a while after I broke up with him. Letters, mostly. This was before email, before cell phones. He kept writing, asking me to reconsider, to come to California. For how long? Quote, about 6 months. Then I met your father at that church picnic, and everything changed so fast. He was safe, steady, everything Michael wasn't. I handed her another tissue from the counter. What do you mean? Michael was brilliant, ambitious, but he was also intense. He wanted to change the world, build massive infrastructure projects, travel constantly for work. When he talked about our future, it was all conference rooms and cocktail parties and moving every few years for bigger projects. She stood up and walked to the sink, staring out at Dad's workshop. Your father offered me something different. Roots, stability, a life where I could have a garden and know my neighbors and raise children who'd grow up in the same house their whole childhood. And you never regretted that choice? The pause was too long. I thought I didn't. For decades, I was sure I'd made the right decision. Your father is a good man, Rebecca. He's honest and hardworking, and he's never looked at another woman in all our years together. But lately, watching him struggle, seeing him blame himself for the business failing, Michael's life looked so different. When I found his company website, saw the projects he's worked on, the awards he's won. She turned back to me. I started wondering what would have happened if I'd been braver. My phone buzzed on the table, a text from my boyfriend Jake asking about dinner plans, normal life continuing while mine was falling apart. So you reached out to him. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I'd send one message asking how he was doing, maybe mention that I'd seen an article about one of his projects. But when he responded immediately, when he seemed genuinely happy to hear from me, she sat back down heavily. The conversation just flowed like it used to. He asked about my life, and before I knew it, I was telling him everything. About Dad's business troubles, about how worried I was, how helpless I felt. And he offered to help. He said he owed me for breaking his heart, that the least he could do was help me in return. He made it sound so simple, so innocent. Just a friend helping an old friend. I studied my mother's face, trying to reconcile this woman with the one who'd raised me. The Patricia Henderson I knew was cautious with money, practical to a fault, someone who clipped coupons and bought generic brands to save 50 cents. Mom, did you tell him about the exact amount you needed? Quote, her silence told me everything. You told him the mortgage payment amount. He asked for specifics. Said he wanted to make sure it was enough to really help, not just a gesture. So you had his banking information? He said he'd wire it directly. Asked for our account details. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Mom, do you understand how this looks? You're essentially accepting money from an ex-boyfriend who you admitted you loved, behind Dad's back, after having a 2-hour conversation about your life and marriage. It wasn't like that. What was it like then? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you had an emotional affair and then accepted money from the man you're having it with. Mom recoiled as if I'd slapped her. Rebecca Marie Henderson, how dare you? How dare I what? Point out that you went behind Dad's back to another man when your marriage got difficult? I was trying to save our house. You were trying to save Dad's pride by destroying it in a completely different way. We stared at each other across the kitchen table, both breathing hard. Outside, I could hear the rhythmic sound of Dad's hammer against wood. He always worked with his hands when he was upset. Does Dad know about the conversation, about how long you talked? No. I just told him that Michael sent the money when I mentioned we were struggling. So you lied to him. I didn't lie, I just didn't tell him everything. Mom, that's literally what lying is. She stood up abruptly and began clearing the breakfast dishes with sharp, angry movements. You don't understand. You're 26 years old, you've never been married, never had to watch someone you love suffer and not be able to fix it. So fix it by being honest with Dad, not by going to other men. Michael isn't other men. He's someone who knew me before I became a wife and mother. Before I became someone whose biggest decisions revolved around grocery lists and PTA meetings. The admission hung between us like a confession. I realized we'd stumbled into territory much deeper than financial help. Is that how you see your life? How small? Mom's hands stilled on the dishes. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. Sometimes I wonder who I might have become. Michael sends me updates about his projects. Bridges in Japan, airports in Dubai, conference centers in major cities. Meanwhile, I'm excited if the library gets a new shipment of romance novels. Quote, "There's nothing wrong with your life, Mom." Isn't there? She turned to face me, tears flowing freely now. I'm 62 years old, Rebecca. I've never been further from Ohio than Kentucky. I've never had a passport, never eaten sushi, never been to a symphony. When Michael called, he told me about attending galas and traveling to 12 different countries last year for work. And that made you feel like your life was lacking? It made me feel like I'd made myself small to fit into the life I chose. I felt a chill run down my spine. Mom, are you in love with him? The question sat heavy in the air between us. Outside, Dad's hammering had stopped. I don't know, she whispered finally. I know I love the person I was when I was with him. I was bolder then, more curious about the world. With Michael, I felt like I could become anyone, do anything. And with Dad, with your father, I became who I thought I should be, a good wife, a devoted mother, a pillar of the community. But somewhere along the way, I lost the part of me that dreamed big. The screen door opened and Dad stepped back into the kitchen. His hair was disheveled, and there were wood shavings on his flannel shirt. He looked between Mom and me, taking in our tear-stained faces. I could hear you two from the workshop. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Patricia, I think it's time you told me everything, and I mean everything. Mom straightened in her chair, wiping her face with the dish towel she'd been clutching. Robert, Start with when you first contacted him. And don't leave anything out this time. I looked between my parents, realizing that whatever came next would either heal or destroy their marriage. The kitchen that had always felt like the safest place in the world suddenly felt like a courtroom, and my mother was about to stand trial for crimes she might not even fully understand she'd committed. Mom took a shaky breath and began. I contacted him 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday. You were at work, Robert, and I was sitting here paying bills. The mortgage notice was right there on the table. Final notice before foreclosure proceedings. Dad's knuckles went white as he gripped the back of his chair. I stared at that paper for an hour. I kept thinking about how you'd been skipping meals to save money, how you'd sold your father's tools to make the last payment. I couldn't watch you sacrifice any more of yourself. Quote, so you sacrificed our marriage instead. Dad said quietly. I was trying to save it, Mom's voice cracked. I typed his name into the computer and found his company immediately. Chen Engineering Solutions. There were photos of him at ribbon cuttings, articles about projects he'd designed. He looked successful, happy, distinguished. I watched Dad absorb this, saw him imagining his wife looking at photos of another man. The LinkedIn message was simple, Mom continued. I told him I was Patricia Williams from Ohio State, that I'd seen an article about his work and wanted to congratulate him. I signed it with my maiden name. Williams, I repeated, you used your maiden name. I thought maybe he wouldn't remember me if I used Henderson. Dad let out a bitter laugh. But he did remember. He responded within an hour, said he'd never forgotten me, that he'd wondered about my life for decades. He asked if I was happy. The kitchen felt suffocating. I opened the window over the sink, letting in the cool October air. What did you tell him? I said I was married with a grown daughter, that life had been good to me. But then he started asking specific questions about my interests, whether I still loved photography, if I'd ever traveled to the places we used to talk about. Photography? I looked at Mom in surprise. You never mentioned you liked photography. I gave it up after we married. Your father thought it was an expensive hobby, and we needed the money for more practical things. Dad flinched. You never told me you wanted to continue with that. You never asked what I wanted to continue with. The accusation hung heavy between them. I realized I was witnessing years of small compromises and unspoken resentments finally surfacing. Go on, Dad said tightly. What else did you discuss during your 2-hour conversation? He told me about his projects, his travels. He's been to 47 countries for work. He's designed bridges that span entire valleys, airports that serve millions of people. Mom's voice took on a wistful quality. He asked if I'd ever been to Europe, if I'd seen the Northern Lights, if I'd learned to speak French like I'd always wanted. And you told him no to all of it. I told him I'd built a different kind of life, that I'd focused on family and community instead of adventure. But that wasn't enough, was it? Dad's voice was raw. When he offered you a glimpse of the life you could have had, you couldn't resist. It wasn't about the life I could have had. Mom slammed her hand on the counter. It was about the life I still might want. I'm 62, Robert, not 92. I still have dreams, still have things I want to see and do. With him? The question landed like a physical blow. Mom's face crumpled. I don't know, maybe. He asked if I was ever in California, said he'd love to show me some of his projects, take me to this gallery he thought I'd enjoy. Dad sat down heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 65 years. Jesus, Patricia. He also asked about you, Mom added quickly. About our marriage, whether we were happy. And what did you say? I said we used to be. The honesty was brutal. I felt like I was intruding on something too private, but I couldn't leave them alone at this moment. When did he offer the money? I asked. When I told him about the mortgage, I wasn't asking for help. I was just explaining why I was stressed, why I'd reached out to an old friend. But he immediately said he wanted to help, that he'd never forgiven himself for not fighting harder to keep me. What does that mean? Dad demanded. When I broke up with him, he said he should have tried harder to convince me, should have offered to stay in Ohio instead of insisting I move to California with him. He's carried guilt about our relationship ending for 4 decades. Guilt, Dad repeated flatly, or regret. Both, probably. Dad stood up and paced to the refrigerator, staring at the collection of family photos held up by magnets. Pictures of me at various ages, family vacations to nearby lakes, Christmas mornings in this same kitchen. Did you tell him about these? He gestured at the photos. About Rebecca's first steps in this living room. About the time she fell off her bike and we spent the night in the emergency room. About the way she used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms? Of course I did. And what did he say? Mom hesitated. He said it sounded like I'd been a wonderful mother. But he also said it sounded like I'd disappeared into motherhood completely. That the Patricia he knew had wanted to photograph the world, not just document family birthdays. I felt something cold settle in my chest. He said you disappeared? He meant it kindly. He said he could hear in my voice that I'd buried parts of myself to be the wife and mother I thought you both needed. Dad's hands clenched into fists. So he appointed himself your savior, offered to rescue you from your boring life with your boring husband. He offered to help a friend who was in trouble. Friends don't send $1,500 to married women they used to sleep with. The words exploded out of Dad with a force that made both Mom and me step back. In 26 years, I'd never heard him raise his voice like that. He also sent something else, Mom said quietly. Dad and I both turned to stare at her. What else? Dad's voice was dangerously low. Mom walked to the kitchen junk drawer and pulled out an envelope. Her hands trembled as she held it out to Dad. He sent a letter with the money transfer confirmation. Dad took the envelope like it might burn him. The return address read, M. Chen, Chen Engineering Solutions, San Francisco, California. Have you read it? He asked. Yes. Out loud. Read it out loud right now. Mom's face went pale again. Robert, I don't think. Read it, Patricia. If this is just innocent help from an old friend, then there shouldn't be anything in there that you can't share with your husband and daughter. Mom took the letter with shaking hands and unfolded it. The paper was expensive, cream-colored with a subtle watermark. Dear Patricia, she began, her voice barely audible, I hope this money helps ease your immediate worries. I meant what I said during our conversation. I've thought about you every day for 43 years. Dad closed his eyes. Mom continued reading. I know you chose a different path, and I respect the life you've built. But I also know the woman I fell in love with is still there somewhere, buried under years of compromise and sacrifice. Keep going, Dad said, through gritted teeth. I'm not trying to interfere with your marriage, but I want you to know that if you ever decide you want something different, my door is always open. The offer I made in 1981 still stands. I would still go anywhere, do anything, to have you in my life. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the wall clock Dad had given Mom for their 10th anniversary. Is there more? I asked. A little. Mom's voice was barely a whisper now. He says, I've built a successful career, but I've never built a successful relationship because no one ever measured up to you. I know it's selfish, but losing you was the biggest regret of my life. And if there's any chance you might want to explore what we could be now, I'm willing to wait as long as it takes. Dad walked to the kitchen sink and gripped the edge of the counter so hard I thought he might crack the porcelain. He signed it with all my love, Michael, Mom finished. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Dad's shoulders were shaking, and I realized he was crying. In all my years, I'd seen my father cry exactly twice, when his own father died and when I graduated college. This was different. This was the sound of a man's world collapsing. 43 years, he finally said, his voice thick. I gave you 43 years of my life. I worked every day to provide for you and Rebecca. I turned down jobs that would have taken me away from home because I wanted to be here for dinner every night. I never looked at another woman, never even considered it. He turned to face us, and the pain in his eyes was devastating. And the first time things get really hard, you run to another man, not just any man, the one who got away, the one who represents everything I'm not. Robert, that's not true. Isn't it? He's educated, sophisticated, wealthy. He can offer you the world I never could. And now he's offering to take you away from the small, boring life you settled for with me. I never said I settled. You didn't have to say it, Patricia. It's written all over this letter. He's telling you that you compromised yourself to be with me, that you buried who you really were to fit into my simple life. I watched my parents face each other across the kitchen like strangers, and realized that maybe that's what they'd become somewhere along the way. Two people who'd grown in different directions but had never acknowledged it. Dad, I said carefully, what are you thinking right now? He looked at me with eyes that seemed much older than they had an hour ago. I'm thinking that maybe your mother deserves the chance to find out who she really is. And maybe I've been selfish keeping her here all these years when she clearly wanted something bigger. Robert, no. Maybe Michael Chen is right. Maybe you did disappear into this life, and maybe that's my fault for never encouraging you to be more than my wife and Rebecca's mother. The defeat in his voice was worse than the anger had been. I felt like I was watching my father give up on everything he'd believed in. But here's what I need to know, Patricia. Dad's voice steadied, becoming firm again. Was this about the money? Or was this about him? Because if you needed help, you could have come to me. We could have figured something out together. But you went to him instead, and I need to understand why. Mom looked down at the letter still in her hands. When she finally met Dad's eyes, I saw something shift in her expression. Because, she said slowly, for the first time in decades, someone was asking me what I wanted instead of what I needed to do. Dad stared at Mom for a long moment, her words echoing in the suddenly quiet kitchen. Then he pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Mom asked, alarm creeping into her voice. "I'm calling him." "Robert, no!" Mom lunged forward, reaching for the phone, but Dad stepped back. "You want to know what you want instead of what you need to do? Fine, let's find out." His fingers moved across the screen with determined precision. "What's his number, Patricia?" "I'm not giving you his number." "Then I'll call his company, Chen Engineering Solutions, right?" Dad was already pulling up the website. "I'm sure they'll be happy to connect me with their CEO. Mom grabbed his arm. "Please don't do this. You'll regret it." "I'll regret it?" Dad shook her off gently but firmly. "Patricia, I already regret 43 years of apparently holding you back from your true potential." "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." Dad found the company's main number. "You just told me that another man asks you what you want, while I only ask what you need to do. Well, here's what I want to know. Does he plan to keep sending my wife money? Does he expect something in return? And are you planning to give it to him?" My heart pounded as Dad pressed the call button. It was Saturday afternoon, so the chances of reaching Michael directly were slim, but the gesture itself felt like a point of no return. "Dad, hang up," I said. "This isn't the way to handle this." "Then how should I handle it, Rebecca? Should I pretend my wife didn't just tell me she's been emotionally cheating with her ex-boyfriend? Should I smile and thank him for the money while he tries to steal my wife?" The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, someone picked up. "Chen Engineering, this is Michael." Dad's eyes widened slightly. He'd expected voicemail or a secretary. "Mr. Chen, this is Robert Henderson. I believe you know my wife, Patricia." Quote. Mom sank into her chair, covering her face with her hands. "Robert?" Michael's voice was calm, professional. "Patricia mentioned she was married. I assume this is about the assistance I provided." "Assistance?" Dad's voice was ice cold. "Is that what you're calling it?" "I'm calling it what it is. Helping an old friend through a difficult time." By sending her money behind her husband's back after a 2-hour conversation about how unhappy she is in her marriage? There was a pause. "Patricia told you about our conversation." "She told me enough. What I want to know is what you expect in return for your generosity." "I don't expect anything in return." "Mr. Chen, I'm 65 years old and I've been married for 43 years. Men don't send money to other men's wives out of pure altruism, especially not when those wives are women they used to be in love with." "You're right." Michael's admission surprised all of us. "I do want something in return." Dad put the phone on speaker without asking. Mom looked up in horror. "I want Patricia to be happy," Michael continued. "I want her to have the life she deserves, whether that's with you or without you. Generous of you to offer my wife permission to leave me. I'm not offering her permission. I'm offering her an option. There's a difference." Dad's face was flushed red now. "An option to what? Run away with you to California and live the glamorous life she missed out on? An option to remember who she was before she became someone else's definition of what a woman should be." "Excuse me?" "Robert, I'm not trying to insult you, but the Patricia I knew had fire. She had dreams that went beyond her zip code. She wanted to see the world, create something meaningful, push boundaries. She did create something meaningful. She created a family. I'm sure she did. But from our conversation, it sounds like she lost herself in the process. I watched my mother listen to 2 men discuss her life, like she wasn't in the room. Her face had gone from pale to red, and I could see anger building behind her tears." "Mr. Chen," Dad continued, "let me be very clear. Patricia is my wife. We've built a life together, and we'll figure out our problems together. Your money isn't welcome here, and neither are your opinions about our marriage. Have you asked Patricia what she wants? I'm asking her right now. Dad looked directly at Mom. Patricia, do you want this man's money? Mom stood up slowly, wiping her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was stronger than it had been all morning. I want you both to stop talking about me like I'm not here. Both Dad and Michael fell silent. Michael, thank you for trying to help, but Robert's right. This is our marriage, and we need to handle our problems ourselves. Patricia, Michael's voice softened, you know how I feel. If you ever change your mind about anything at all, you have my number. She won't be using it, Dad said firmly. That's not your decision to make, Mom snapped, surprising all of us. Michael, I appreciate everything, but I need to figure out what I want before I can make any decisions about anything. I understand. Take all the time you need. Dad hung up without saying goodbye. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Well, Mom said finally, that accomplished nothing except making everything worse. Did it? Dad challenged. Because now I know exactly where we stand. Your ex-boyfriend thinks you've wasted your life with me, and apparently you agree with him. I never said that. You didn't have to. Every word out of your mouth this morning has been about what you gave up, what you sacrificed, what you settled for. Well, newsflash, Patricia, marriage is about sacrifice. I sacrificed things too. Like what? Like the foreman position in Denver that would have doubled my salary. Like the chance to expand the business when that investor approached me 15 years ago. Like the hunting trips with my brothers that I stopped taking because you said you needed me home on weekends. Mom blinked in surprise. You never told me about any of those things. Because I didn't want you to feel guilty. I made those choices gladly because I thought we were building something together. Apparently, I was wrong. I finally found my voice. You're both wrong if you think this is about who sacrificed more. This is about Mom feeling like she lost herself somewhere along the way, and Dad feeling like he's not enough. They both turned to look at me, and I realized I'd stumbled onto something important. Mom, you're talking about photography and travel and dreams like they're dead just because you're 62? They're not dead unless you decide they are. And Dad, you're acting like Mom wanting more out of life is somehow an insult to you personally. Isn't it? Dad asked. If the life I provided wasn't enough, the life you provided was exactly what she needed when she was 22 and starting a family. But people grow and change, and maybe what she needs now is different. Mom stared at me. You think I should leave your father? I think you should figure out what you actually want instead of what you think you should want. And I think Dad should stop taking your unhappiness as a personal attack on everything he's worked for. Dad slumped against the counter. So what now? Do we just pretend this morning never happened? Do I pretend my wife didn't just tell me she's been dreaming about another man for decades? I never said I was dreaming about him. You said you loved the person you were with. You said he made you feel like you could be anyone, do anything. You took his money and read his love letter, and you're considering his invitation to visit him in California. I am not considering visiting him. Aren't you? The question hung in the air unanswered. Mom opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. Oh my God, Dad breathed. You are considering it. I'm considering a lot of things right now, Mom exploded. I'm considering what it means that I had to go to another man to solve a problem you were too proud to let me help with. I'm considering what it means that the most exciting conversation I've had in years was with someone I haven't seen in 4 decades. I'm considering whether the woman I've become is someone I even recognize anymore. And I'm considering, Dad said quietly, whether the woman I married ever existed at all, or if she was just pretending to be someone she thought I wanted until she couldn't pretend anymore. The accusation hit Mom like a physical blow. She sat down hard in her chair, staring at her hands. Maybe she was, Mom whispered finally. Maybe I did become someone I thought you'd love instead of being someone I actually was. Then we have a problem, Dad said, because I fell in love with the woman you were pretending to be, and you fell in love with a fantasy of who you thought I was. I looked between my parents and realized we'd reached the moment where everything would either break completely or somehow find a way to heal. The question was whether they were brave enough to find out which. The 3 of us sat in stunned silence, the weight of Dad's words settling over the kitchen like smoke. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked, and somewhere down the street, someone was mowing their lawn. Normal Saturday sounds from a world that suddenly felt very far away. "I need some air," Dad said finally. He walked toward the back door, then stopped. "Patricia, I'm going to take a drive. When I get back, we need to decide what we're going to do about this." "What do you mean, what are we going to do?" "I mean whether we're going to try to fix this marriage or end it." The words came out flat, matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "Because right now, I don't even know who you are." The door closed behind him with a soft click. A moment later, we heard his truck start up and pull out of the driveway. Mom and I sat at the kitchen table, neither of us knowing what to say. The breakfast dishes were still sitting in the sink, the pancakes long since cold. Everything looked the same as it had 2 hours ago, but nothing would ever be the same again. "Mom," I said carefully, "are you okay?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Am I okay? Rebecca, I just destroyed my marriage for a man I haven't seen in 43 years. I'm the furthest thing from okay." "Did you destroy it, though? Or did you just finally tell the truth about what's been wrong for a long time?" She looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe this isn't about Michael at all. Maybe he was just the catalyst for something that was already broken." Mom stood up and walked to the window, watching the empty driveway where Dad's truck had been. "Your father and I used to talk for hours when we were dating, about everything. Books, movies, politics, dreams. When did we stop doing that?" "I don't know." "When did you?" "Gradually. So gradually, I didn't notice it happening. First, it was just logistics. Who's picking up Rebecca? What needs to be fixed around the house? When are we visiting your grandparents?" Then Rebecca grew up and left, and we realized we'd forgotten how to talk about anything except the weather and what to have for dinner. I thought about the conversations I'd witnessed between my parents over the years. She was right. Their interactions had become purely functional somewhere along the way. But that happens to lots of couples, doesn't it? That doesn't mean you stop loving each other. Doesn't it? Mom turned from the window. "When was the last time your father asked me what I thought about something that wasn't related to household management? When was the last time I asked him about his dreams instead of just his day at work?" I tried to remember and came up empty. "We became roommates who shared expenses and family obligations," Mom continued. "Good roommates, compatible roommates, but still just roommates." "So why didn't you say something? Why didn't you try to fix it?" "Because I thought it was normal. I thought that's what happened when you got older, when the excitement of new love wore off. I thought we were just being mature, responsible adults. Until Michael reminded you what it felt like to have someone actually interested in your thoughts and dreams." Mom nodded slowly. "It wasn't that he was trying to seduce me or anything dramatic like that. It was just, he asked me questions about myself that no one had asked in years. What books was I reading? What did I think about current events? Did I still write poetry like I used to in college?" "You wrote poetry." "Every day for years. I had notebooks full of it." "What happened to them?" "I threw them away when we moved into this house. I needed the storage space for baby clothes and equipment." The casual way she said it broke my heart a little. "Mom, why didn't you keep writing?" "When?" "Between diaper changes and playdates and PTA meetings." "And besides, what would have been the point? It's not like I was going to become the next Maya Angelou." "Maybe the point was that you enjoyed it." She stared at me like I'd said something in a foreign language. I forgot that used to be enough reason to do something. My phone buzzed. A text from Jake asking if I was still coming home tonight. The outside world reminding me it still existed. "Mom, can I ask you something honestly? Haven't you been doing that all morning? Are you in love with Michael?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I think I'm in love with who I was when I was with him. Does that make sense?" "Kind of. But that's not the same thing, isn't it?" When I talked to him, I remembered that I used to have opinions about things that mattered. I used to read newspapers and books and think about the world beyond this kitchen. I used to believe I had something valuable to contribute to conversations. You still do. Do I? When was the last time anyone asked for my opinion on anything important? When was the last time I had an opinion on anything important? I thought about this. What do you think about the climate change protests downtown, or the new city council proposals, or the fact that they're tearing down the old library? Mom blinked. They're tearing down the library? It was in the paper last week. Big front page story. I don't remember reading that. When was the last time you read the paper? Really read it, not just glanced at the headlines? I don't know, months maybe. We stared at each other as the realization sank in. Somewhere along the way, Mom had stopped engaging with the world outside our family circle. Michael made me feel like I still mattered, she said quietly, like my thoughts and experiences were worth something to someone. They're worth something to me. They're worth something to Dad, too. Maybe he forgot to show it. Or maybe I forgot how to share them. The front door opened, and Dad's voice called from the living room. Patricia? Rebecca? I'm back. Mom's face went pale again. I don't know what to say to him. Start with the truth. All of it this time. Dad appeared in the kitchen doorway. His hair was windblown, and his eyes were red, but he looked calmer somehow. I drove to the lake, he said. Sat on that bench where we used to take Rebecca to feed the ducks. Did a lot of thinking. Mom and I waited. Patricia, I owe you an apology. Whatever Mom had been expecting, it wasn't that. Robert, let me finish. I've been thinking about what you said. About Michael asking what you want instead of what you need to do. And I realized you're right. When was the last time I asked you what you wanted? When was the last time I treated you like an individual person instead of just my wife and Rebecca's mother? Dad pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. I've been taking you for granted for years. I assumed that because you seemed content, you were happy. I assumed that because you didn't complain, everything was fine. I should have said something. No, you shouldn't have had to. I should have been paying attention. I should have noticed that the woman I married, the one who used to drag me to art galleries and poetry readings, had disappeared. Mom's eyes filled with tears. I didn't think you liked those things. I didn't, particularly. But I liked watching you enjoy them. I liked seeing you passionate about something. When did we stop doing things that made you light up? When Rebecca was born, maybe? We got so focused on being good parents that we forgot how to be interesting people. Dad nodded slowly. And then when she left for college, instead of rediscovering who we were together, we just kept going through the motions. So what does this mean? I asked. Are you guys going to try to work this out? Dad looked directly at Mom. That depends on whether Patricia wants to work it out, or whether she'd rather explore what life might be like with someone who never stopped seeing her as an individual. Robert, I don't want to leave you for Michael. But do you want to stay with me? The question hung in the air between them. I held my breath, realizing that my parents' entire future hinged on whatever Mom said next. I want to stay with the man I married, she said finally. But that man disappeared somewhere along the way too. The Robert the first fell in love with used to ask me what I thought about things. He used to bring me books he thought I'd enjoy. He used to plan little surprises just to see me smile. When did I stop doing those things? When life got busy. When we got comfortable. When we started assuming we'd have forever to get back to being interesting to each other. Dad was quiet for a long moment. Patricia, what if we tried something? What kind of something? What if we pretended we were dating again? What if we tried to remember what it was like when we were curious about each other instead of just familiar? Mom wiped her eyes. You think that would work? I think it's worth finding out. But only if you're willing to give up your pen pal in California. And what are you willing to give up? Dad thought about this. My pride, I guess. My assumption that providing for you financially was the same thing as making you happy. My belief that our marriage was fine just because it was stable. Those are big things to give up. So is 43 years of marriage. Mom looked between Dad and me, and I could see her weighing her options. Stay with the familiar and try to rebuild it, or leap into the unknown with someone who represented everything she thought she'd missed. Okay, she said finally, but I have conditions. Name them. I want to go back to school, part-time, just a few classes, literature or photography or something that feeds my brain. Done. I want us to travel somewhere, not just the lake or your sister's house, somewhere I've never been. Where would you like to go? I don't know yet. I want to research it and plan it and get excited about it. Dad smiled for the first time all day. I'd like that. And I want to get my camera equipment back. I want to start taking pictures again, even if they're terrible. They won't be terrible. How do you know? Because I remember the photos you used to take. You had an eye for finding beauty in ordinary things. Mom stared at him. You remember my photography. I remember everything about who you were when I met you, Patricia. I guess I stopped encouraging you to be that person. Why? Because I was scared you'd realize you could do better than a construction worker from Ohio. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had known existed. Robert, Mom said softly, I never wanted to do better than you. I just wanted to do more with you. 3 months later, I was sitting in my apartment in Columbus when my phone rang. It was Mom, and she sounded different. Lighter somehow. Rebecca, you'll never guess where I'm calling you from. Where? A coffee shop in Prague. I nearly dropped my phone. Prague? As in the Czech Republic, Prague? Your father and I are on our honeymoon, our second honeymoon, I guess. I could hear Dad's voice in the background saying something about the architecture, and Mom laughing in response. Mom, start from the beginning. What happened after I left that day? Well, your father kept his word about everything. The Monday after our kitchen catastrophe, he drove me to the community college and waited while I enrolled in 3 classes: Introduction to Digital Photography, European Literature, and Beginning Czech Language. Czech language? I'd always wanted to visit Eastern Europe. Something about the history, the art, the way they rebuilt after so much destruction. And Dad was okay with that? More than okay. He enrolled in a small business management course. Said if he was going to keep the construction company going, he needed to learn how to actually run it properly, instead of just hoping for the best. I smiled, imagining my practical father sitting in a college classroom surrounded by 20-somethings. But the real change happened when we started dating again. You actually did that? Every Tuesday and Friday night. Your father would pick me up at exactly 7 o'clock, and we'd go somewhere we'd never been before. Art galleries, lectures at the university, that little Ethiopian restaurant downtown that we'd driven past for 20 years but never tried. How did it go? Awkward at first. We realized we'd forgotten how to have conversations that weren't about logistics. The first few dates, we mostly sat there making small talk like strangers. But it got better. It got real. On our 4th date, your father asked me what I regretted most about our marriage. Not what I regretted about him, but about us. About the choices we'd made together. That's a loaded question for a date. It was exactly what we needed. I told him I regretted that we'd stopped dreaming together. That somewhere along the way we'd become so focused on maintaining what we had that we forgot to imagine what we could become. What did he say? He said he regretted assuming that because I'd chosen him over Michael, I'd never want anything more than what he could provide. He'd spent 43 years trying to be enough instead of trying to help me grow. I felt tears prick my eyes. That must have been hard to hear. It was beautiful to hear. For the first time in years, we were being completely honest with each other. What about Michael? Did you ever talk to him again? There was a pause. I called him about 6 weeks after that Saturday. I needed to close that door properly. How did he take it? Better than I expected. He said he was glad I was fighting for my marriage instead of running away from it. He also said something that surprised me. What? He said he'd been thinking about our conversation and he realized he wasn't in love with me so much as he was in love with the idea of rescuing someone. That maybe his 43 years of carrying a torch had been more about his ego than about actual love. Wow. He was right. I think I was attracted to the idea of being rescued too. It felt easier than doing the hard work of fixing what was actually broken. And you sent the money back? Every penny, plus interest. Your father insisted. He said we'd find another way to save the house. Did you? Better than that, we sold it. You sold the house? I couldn't hide my shock. That house had been home for my entire life. We downsized to a little bungalow closer to town. Used the equity to pay off all our debts and fund our new adventures. Turns out we didn't need 4 bedrooms and a huge yard anymore. How do you feel about that? Free? Lighter. Like we're not carrying around the weight of so much stuff we didn't really need. And the business? Thriving, actually. Your father partnered with a younger contractor who handles the physical labor, while Dad focuses on project management and client relations. He's making more money now working 3 days a week than he used to make working 6. So what are you doing with all this free time? Living, Rebecca. Really living. I'm taking photos again. I even sold a few to a local gallery. We're learning Czech together, planning to spend a month here next year. Your father is reading books about European history, of all things. Dad is reading about history? He's become obsessed with World War II resistance movements. Who knew? Last week, he spent an entire evening telling me about the Prague Spring. I laughed, trying to imagine my practical father passionately discussing Czech politics. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd chosen differently that day? If you'd decided to explore things with Michael instead of working on your marriage? Honestly, I think I would have been making the same mistake all over again. What do you mean? I would have been looking for someone else to define who I was instead of figuring it out for myself. Michael saw me as the adventurous woman I used to be, but I'm not 22 anymore. I needed to discover who I am at 62, not try to recapture who I was 4 decades ago. And who are you at 62? I'm someone who loves taking pictures of old buildings and learning new languages and having deep conversations with her husband about books we're reading. I'm someone who's finally brave enough to want things just because I want them, not because they're practical or expected. You sound happy, Mom. I am happy. But more than that, I'm interested in my own life again. And your father is interested in his life, too. We're not just going through the motions anymore. What about Dad? How has he changed? He's softer somehow, more curious. He asks me what I think about things again, and he actually listens to the answers. Yesterday, he brought me a book of photography from the library because he thought I'd like the way the photographer captured light in urban settings. He bought you a book? He's been bringing me books and articles and little things he thinks might interest me every week since we started dating again. It's like he's courting me. That's sweet. It's more than sweet, it's intentional. We're being intentional about loving each other instead of just assuming love will maintain itself. I could hear Dad's voice getting closer, and Mom said, "Your father wants to talk to you." Rebecca? Dad's voice came through the phone, warm and slightly breathless. Your mom's making me climb cobblestone hills all over this city. How are you doing, Dad? Better than I've been in years. Your mother is a hell of a tour guide when she puts her mind to it. I hear you're reading about Czech history. Who knew it was so fascinating? Did you know that during the Nazi occupation, Czech resistance fighters? He launched into an enthusiastic explanation of something he'd learned, and I smiled, listening to the passion in his voice. This was not the defeated, worried man I'd left in that kitchen 3 months ago. Dad, can I ask you something? Shoot. Are you glad Mom didn't leave with Michael? Every day. But not for the reason you might think. What do you mean? I'm not glad because I got to keep her. I'm glad because we both got to discover that we're worth fighting for. The marriage we have now is completely different from the one we had before, and it's better because we chose it with our eyes wide open. No regrets? Only one. I regret that it took nearly losing everything to wake us up. We wasted a lot of years being comfortable instead of being connected. But you're connected now? More than we've ever been. Ask your mother about our 5-year plan. Mom took the phone back. We made a list of all the places we want to visit and experiences we want to have while we're still healthy enough to enjoy them. Next year, it's Prague for a month, then Ireland, then maybe Southeast Asia. What about photography? I'm documenting everything. This trip will be my first real photo series in decades. I'm calling it Second Chances. I love that. Rebecca, there's something else, something important I want to tell you. What? Thank you. For what? For not letting us take the easy way out that day. For making us face the truth, instead of just sweeping it under the rug. If you hadn't pushed us to be honest with each other, we might have spent the rest of our lives being polite strangers. I just asked questions, Mom. You asked the right questions at the right time. You saved our marriage by refusing to let us pretend it didn't need saving. Quote, I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. I'm so proud of you both. We're proud of ourselves too. And Rebecca, we want you to learn something from our mistakes. What's that? Don't wait until you're 62 to start being brave about what you want from life. Don't settle for comfort when you could have something extraordinary. And don't ever assume that love can survive on autopilot. As I hung up the phone and looked around my small apartment, I thought about their words. What did I want that I wasn't brave enough to ask for? What dreams had I put on hold because they seemed impractical? That night, I called Jake and told him I wanted to talk about our future. Not just our next vacation or when we might move in together, but our real dreams and fears and hopes. It was a conversation we'd been avoiding, just like my parents had avoided so many conversations over the years. Sometimes the most devastating questions lead to the most beautiful answers. Sometimes admitting that something is broken is the first step toward building something better. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to accept good enough when you could have something extraordinary instead. That Saturday morning in my parents' kitchen taught me that it's never too late to choose love over comfort, growth over security, and truth over convenience. Even when the truth threatens to destroy everything you thought you knew about your life. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.